Welcome back, everybody, to the Marketing Rules podcast. And today I'm joined by Jim Heininger from Rebranding Experts. Jim, it's an absolute pleasure. We've not really kind of had much of a time to kind of catch up, and so it'd be great if you can kind of inform me and tell our kind of our audience a little bit about yourself and a little bit about your kind of business and a little bit about maybe kind of your kind of background and history as well.
You bet. First of all, it's great to be with you. So thank you. So I spent about 25 years in the U.S. Large global agency environment, working on a number of major blue chip accounts, really more on the PR and strategic communication side. Then did a quick stint at McDonald's Corporation, where I went in as kind of a hired gun to help out on a major corporate issues that needed to be resolved for that organization. And then they actually helped me form a new agency. They promised me business, and I opened my own agency. And along the way, we did a number of different rebrandings for different organizations. And not only did I find it really interesting and challenging work, but I quickly discovered that there was a whole set of capabilities that was needed to help an organization rebrand successfully that a traditional marketing agency, a traditional branding agency didn't have, and needed to be brought under one roof to be able to really help organizations through that process successfully. So about 5 years ago, we created a specialty firm, Rebranding Experts. And not only do we do the creative side of things in terms of the naming and the new logo and visual identity development of a new brand, but we do all the CEO coaching and the leadership team guidance and the internal change management work and employee engagement that's needed to really launch successfully a new brand.
Basically, all the stuff that gets forgotten normally.
Right. And it goes into the execution of it. And it's where a lot of rebrandings tend to trip up or not, or fail, is because the execution of it isn't done well.
Yeah. No, and I know at some point later on in the podcast, you're going to kind of share with us some examples of the good, the bad, and the ugly. Hopefully, of when it goes right and when it goes wrong. But I guess kind of when a business has kind of made that decision to rebrand, it's not done lightly, right? There's maybe you can kind of explain to us how a business gets there in the first place. What are the drivers that business kind of thinks, well, how do they get to that situation?
You bet. So I like to say there's two buckets of reasons that an organization, a company would rebrand. The first of them is need, where there's a driving need that's kind of forcing them to do it. And the second bucket is opportunity, where they proactively want to make the move because they know it will benefit their business for years to come, for the long term. So under that bucket of need, that's most often things like a merger or an acquisition, or new ownership, or new leadership even, or oftentimes it's where the external environment has changed and your brand now is just horribly irrelevant or really out of pace with what's happening in society, and you have a need to rebrand if you're going to continue to operate your business successfully. Then under the bucket of opportunity is really organizations where they're wanting to expand their marketplace. They're either maybe growing their geographic footprint. They're launching a meaningful new corporate change, and they want to take a hold of the opportunity of repositioning themselves in a dynamic new way, and therefore decide to make the leap to do this so that they can really kind of put some fuel behind that change that they're wanting to. And the other way that we look at it is you can refresh your brand, which usually means just kind of a visual makeover. It means, maybe a new logo, maybe a new visual identity. We often call that kind of putting lipstick on the pig, that you're just really kind of dressing it up and making it look a little bit nicer than it did previously. You can reposition your brand, which means that you're gonna change the look and feel of it so that it's more relevant to maybe a new audience that you're trying to attract or market segment you're trying to go after. Or you can rebrand it, which would in our view mean standing up an entirely new brand that you're going to switch to, a new company name, a new look of the organization, a new visual identity, a new go-to-market strategy, a new service offering, a new way of your aligning your customer experience. So we think of a rebranding as really standing up an entirely new brand and then launching it, dynamically into the marketplace.
But there must be kind of grey areas, and I'm thinking just off the top of my head, Weight Watchers kind of rebrand, reposition kind of recently, where they haven't really changed their name. They're now WW, but
Yeah.
it's kind of the same thing but different, right? So there's a grey area in the middle as well, right?
Well, and in their case, it's an interesting example. They wanted to be seen more as a wellness company as opposed to a diet weight reduction company. They
Mhm.
wanted to be more of a wellness, overall wellness, and so they went with the abbreviation of their name, which could have been a little bit of a um, kind of a nickname that some people might have used for it already. But what they did is they were able to trim off the weight word,
Mhm.
which then allowed them to get rid of that heritage of being a diet company so that they could now live more fully in that wellness space. They had a little bit of a hiccup in that process. There was some criticism, there was some kind of speculation of what they were up to when they made that move. I always say it might have been smart for them to have started to push the nickname a little bit more and have used that nickname little bit more in their advertising and their materials and so forth. And then they could have more easily dropped the Weight Watchers as opposed to making a wholesale jump into that new name.
Yeah. What about another kind of potential reason for a refresh and or rebrand is you mentioned maybe a new kind of CEO, but what about someone like maybe a new marketing director? Now, I'm going to apologize to all the marketing directors and marketing managers that are listening, but it's something that we have kind of seen, and someone wanting to kind of stamp their footprint onto a business and come in and go, and I've got the job because they've basically kind of had a great pitch and said, well, we need to refresh the brand because we need to kind of attract this. Surely you must kind of come across that as well with kind of a personality kind of change, which is kind of come and want to and move things into a different direction.
Yeah, sure. And I always say in those kind of cases, get the CEO on board with the idea because you need the CEO to think it's their idea too, and that because you need them to carry the flag, especially internally in front of employees, and their leadership team who needs to come along with the idea. So a smart CMO, marketing director that knows that this needs to be done, plant the seed in the CEO's
Mhm.
mind and get them to own it so that it's more likely to go forward. You'll get the funding you need, then you'll get the backing and the support that you need to get the organization as a whole behind it.
So a lot of this conversation, I think, has been based around kind of larger businesses. What are the considerations that maybe kind of the smaller businesses that want to go through this process or have decided to go through this process need to take into consideration? Because I assume it's maybe a little bit different than the likes of the McDonald's and the Weight Watchers of this world.
The good news is that the smaller the organization, the easier it is to rebrand because your customer numbers are going to be smaller. Your investment already in things like signage, and even if your employees have uniforms or you have retail storefronts and that are all currently branded, if those are fewer, then your costs of rebranding are going to be lower. So smaller organizations tend to be a little bit more nimble and a little bit, easier to be able to do that. The most important thing when it comes to rebranding, whether you're small or large, is what is the problem we're trying to solve. So what are we running into that this brand is just not working as hard for us as it could? And then what is that new brand? What is that expression of the heart and soul of who we are as a company? the promise that we make to our customers and how we deliver upon that, and how do we creatively then express that as a brand, in a name, in a look and feel, visual identity, and so forth. So, um, I always will say, get professional help, even if you're a small organization. Is oftentimes the reason that a small organization is rebranding is because when they came up with their first brand, they didn't have professional input, and so they're trying to correct something that it now requires having somebody that has some branding experience, has the creative kind of juices, that can come in and look at it a little bit differently than perhaps you do, and help you figure out what's the way to express that brand in a really authentic way, but really exciting and captivating to your customers.
And how then do you, with the absolutely, billions of businesses that are out there, and then there are millions in there in kind of competitive markets. What is it they should be doing to try and kind of stick out from the rest? Because I'm sure the thing that they always come to you with, right, is we want to be better than our competitors. We want to be unique. We want to be different. We want to stand out from the crowd. And you must hear this every single time you go through a project, and you must go, you know what, sometimes that's just not possible. Right? Or maybe it is. Maybe you tell me.
Well, it all needs to be about growth. And that's the one thing that we will always say is the number one reason for ever rebranding is growth. That you are needing additional fuel behind what you're doing as a business, to make it successful, and the brand can help do that. If the brand is a great lever with which to achieve that kind of growth, uh, kind of trajectory. I think it's what we often do with clients is we kick off this process because they don't, they really don't understand yet what it entails,
Mhm,
and what kind of steps or decisions that they're going to have to make. Is we'll say you can go small, you can go a little bit more aggressive, or you can go big, and
mhm,
you can really grasp the opportunity to turn your organization forward and facing, and really kind of redefine who you are in the marketplace. But there's a lot of things you're going to have to let go of in doing that, and a lot of that is the history and the tradition and so forth. You're going to have to say what's most important for this organization is that we define ourselves for the future, and lean into that and let it go, because it's going to require a big leap. So it's that's why I always say it's a lot of CEO coaching, and working with the leadership team, because they have to fully embrace the idea of doing this, and all the resources it's going to require, and the time and the energy and so forth, or otherwise you're just going to keep getting tangled up and not make the kind of progress you need.
So that kind of leads on nicely into my next question, which is around the challenges that we should be kind of considering, that a business needs to consider. I mean, what things do we need to do up front? What do we need to kind of consider before we kind of go down this route? And then if we are kind of engaging with a business like yours, or what then do we need to consider?
So out of the box, the first thing is, you have to have a willingness to change what needs to be changed. So if it is the company name, if the company name, I always use this as an example of, if the company is, a company that says, well, we sell milk, and now you're wanting to sell cheeses and other dairy products, and you're wanting to expand your product line. Well, if you call yourself a milk company, that might not be enough to really bring in new customers that want to buy these other products. So you have to be willing to let go of that. And those are very sacred cows, no pun intended, in a lot of organizations, that's been our name since the beginning, or that's been the way we've done things all along. Well, you have to let go of that now if you want to move forward into the future. If you really want to be able to achieve the growth that you think you have the potential to do, you got to let go of things. And then when it comes time to actually launching it, you got to get your employees to let go of those things as well too, and to realize that, everything that they've worked hard for up to that point in time in terms of building a brand, now is going to kind of be leveraged over onto a new brand, and we're going to put our energy behind that. And long-term employees tend to have a little bit of a struggle with the name of the company that they've worked for 20, 30 years changing, and it's not the same that it used to be. And that's where the whole change management piece that we bring
Mhm.
bring
Mhm.
to the process is helpful, because it helps make sure that there's a methodology for leading those people through that change process and that change journey, so that they get excited about it and they want to go out and actively promote the new company.
And again, just kind of relating back to the original question, is this distinctly different from large organisations to small organisations? Is apart from obviously small organisations a bit more kind of fragile, agile. Sorry.
That the difference between large and small is going to be cost and time. Because if you are a major airline that has to change the name on 800 planes, and on gates at different airports, and all your marketing materials and so forth, that takes time, and that takes a
Mhm.
lot of money as well. So that's the biggest difference when it comes to the size of the organization, is the investment that it's going to require. And then it also you have to bring that workforce along, so you're going to have to spend more time training the workforce on, here's a new brand, here's our new brand story, here's the way we want to change or evolve the customer experience. So the training that's required to be able to do that is going to be a much bigger investment for a large company. That's why small ones can do it much more nimbly than large ones.
So, a slightly kind of more kind of philosophical question for you, Jim, is who owns the brand? Who's it for? Right? That's which is always a kind of question I kind of always pose to people. Is like, who is this brand for? And why is it important to certain people and not important to other people? So yeah.
Yeah, and that's a great question when it comes to something like changing the brand too. So, the brand really exists in the minds of your customers. It's the trust mark that you've created through a set of experiences and emotions and visuals and ideas and so forth, that makes them comfortable in trusting you and choosing you, but against a competitive product. So it sits in the mind of the customers. We as marketers do a lot to influence that trust mark in their minds. So therefore, it's really important when rebranding, that you get into the heads of your customers to really understand what it is that they love most dearly about your brand, and why do they trust it much more than others, and so forth, and leverage those equities to define the new brand,
Mhm.
and come from a place of a very solid and comfortable place, as opposed to just leaping right over the customer and coming up with your own reasons why you suddenly are more important. So customer research in this whole process is, that's the first step, is really understanding, why are we the choice? Why are people willing to spend money on our brand versus another one first? And then how do we move that forward? How do we better fulfill their expectations? How do we better align with where they are going and want us to go with them?
Yeah. Um, so following on from that, is it possible then for a business to not really like their brand, but understand that it is so important to their customer base that they shouldn't be changing it, they shouldn't do anything with it because it's going to possibly affect them kind of detrimentally.
You will you will find, first of all, there'll always be some customers who will struggle with you changing the name. And they, those are the vocal ones. Those are the ones that might come out, even if it's an absolute great rebranding. They still may say, "Wait a second, what are you doing?" And we don't like it. We want to go back to the original. And you hear those kind of stories frequently, where someone goes to rebrand, and all of a sudden there's a group of vocal customers who kind of voice their displeasure. Um, I think that part of what you go through in your customer research, or what you need to make sure that you're addressing there, is um, finding out, will this rebranding run into challenges once we launch it? So what do customers think about us? What are their needs? What are the new opportunities that we have with customers? And what is it about our current brand that they really feel strongly linked to? And that oftentimes, you find something. It could be, the CEO or the founder's story of why they created the brand originally that really is the connection point, or the way its service is delivered, or something like that, that you say, okay, we're going to change this, we're going to evolve it, but that has to be at the cornerstone of our new story going forward. Or you have to make sure that founder is the one saying, I want to lead this company in a different direction, so that the customers then will give the acceptance when the time comes. So yeah, it's very important to find out early on, what kind of obstacles are we going to run into when we launch this rebranding. And then again, it's kind of like change management, or almost a little bit of risk management, that you think through those options, those potential things. And when you go to launch, you're working to mitigate them so that they don't become a stumbling block along the way.
Um, and how important is the kind of visuals behind a brand? Because I would imagine that the most kind of first touch point with a brand will be a visual experience. So, and I bet if you asked a lot of people who probably weren't in the same kind of industry that we are, they're what is branding? They'll probably go a logo
The
or something,
logo.
right?
Yep.
And we know that's distinctly different, but on a in a scale, where does it sit, against all the other things that you've already kind of discussed today?
Well, it's increasingly more important, year after year after year, and in today's highly charged social media environment too, it's extremely visual. And we will say you need to tell this story in video first, because that's what people are going to be exposed to first. They're going to see it on a media channel, a social media channel, Facebook, whatever, and they're going to want to see it presented in a visually dynamic way. And
Mhm.
so a key piece of your launch of your new brand is that rebranding video that tells the story of why you are rebranding and what your new brand is. And boy, it's got to be visually dynamic. It's got to be exciting for people to watch. So I would say, you're absolutely right that it's a brand is so much more than a logo, but that visual presentation of your new brand has got to, be perfect from the start.
Yeah. And what about, so we had Martin Lindstrom on here a few kind of months ago. Obviously, it's celebrated kind of branding expert and kind of author, and we talked a little bit about his book Brand Sense, which touches on the different kind of emotions, the things that a brand can give you, and how the senses kind of play into that. And that's what kind of led me to this kind of my question around kind of the visual sense, right? But there are all these other kind of senses that tend to kind of get forgotten when we're talking about kind of branding and our association with a brand. Now, obviously, he's a big advocate of kind of the other kind of bringing those in, and I wonder
Hmm.
if that's anything that you have ever kind of worked towards. Where, I mean, obviously, I'd imagine within something like McDonald's, there's a certain, maybe something they pump into the air that they all smell the same, or something like that. You know what I mean? It always kind of interests me that these other kind of senses kind of bring into the brand experience.
A rebranding is an opportunity to start anew and to build into your new brand all that kind of thinking. And then, what are we going to do from our customer experience? How's it going to feel different than it did previously? It's a perfect time to introduce a new audio, branding component.
Mm.
When you think of Netflix and the sound, that's always plays with the Netflix logo and so forth. Here's a great way to help reinforce that new brand by adding an audio component. So it's you need to look at it as the whole experience that the customer has, and how are we going to want to change that and meet all those different touch point opportunities that we have, and should be thought through very thoroughly, before you ever launch the brand.
So I mentioned this at the start. It'd be great if you could kind of share with us, if you can dish the dirt, basically. Let's start with the kind of the rebranding horror stories. You know what I mean?
Okay.
You don't have to kind of if it's too sensitive, you don't have to name names. But give us kind of some when it goes wrong kind of scenarios. You know?
Sure. So what we see most commonly in terms of horror stories, and this may be a uniquely U.S. perspective, is when someone rebrands and chooses a new name and hasn't done the full trademark research and investigation that they should have, and there is an organization that already is using that name.
Mhm.
And in the US, there's all sorts of protection laws that people can use to say, I've been using this for 10 years. I built up a reputation around it. So now I'm going to sue you, new company that just chose this as your name and potentially profit off of you because you need this name because you just told everybody that it's your new brand. So we see a lot of that happening. Probably is the biggest horror story is this. I didn't do my research fully enough.
Yeah.
And and then got stuck with the brand that there's already somebody in the space using it. The other thing tends to fall into execution, where they don't thoroughly communicate. They don't continue to communicate regularly enough that the brand is changing, and somebody comes back looking for their favorite brand and it's no longer there, and they don't realize they never received the communications that the brand had changed, and now they're confused and, oh boy, well, I'll take this competitive product instead. So it tends to fall in those kind of buckets. There are occasionally, and we're kind of seeing this popping up a little bit more too, where there's a backlash to the rebranding, where customers don't like it, or they say, well, what are you changing this for? We don't want you to. The great example was there was a university in the United States that they were actually merging with another one, and so they kind of needed to change their name or update it, and they didn't engage the alumni audience well enough. And people who had graduated from there and had a great time going to school there, had a degree from that school, suddenly it was being taken away and they weren't happy with it. So they put together petitions and they went to the leadership and tried to fight it and stall it and try to stop it. And then you find yourselves, then you're kind of battling,
Mhm.
among the people that should be your supporters, and that's when things kind of go horribly wrong, because it tends to generate a lot of media attention and press, and that just compounds the problem even more.
Yeah, this would be another discussion, but that's the power of advocates when it comes to kind of branding and things, there, isn't it? That's where that all comes in. But that's a whole other discussion.
Yeah.
Jim, it has been an absolute pleasure talking to you today. I hope the audience have kind of got a lot from this. It's been some great tips and some great kind of great advice in there. We'll obviously include all of your details in the show notes. But for now, thank you very much.
It's been great to be with you, James. Thanks you.